Ancient texts whisper of a pivotal moment, a fracture in the timeline of human existence that remains largely unexamined. For centuries, we have accepted a singular, rigid narrative regarding the Nephilim, treating it as a closed chapter of myth. But what if the foundation of this story is built upon a fundamental misunderstanding? We look back through the lens of modern perception, assuming we see the past clearly, yet the truth may be obscured by layers of translation and cultural bias. Consider the possibility that the most enduring legends are not merely echoes of the past, but deliberate distortions. We are taught to visualize these beings through a specific, narrow frame, yet the original intent of the chroniclers suggests something far more complex. It is time to peel back the surface of these ancient accounts, to look past the ink and the tradition, to question why these specific stories have persisted while others faded into obscurity. The mystery of the Nephilim is not just a relic of antiquity. It is a challenge to our understanding of what it means to be human. Prepare to look at the ancient world, not as it was told to us, but as it truly might have been. For generations, our collective imagination has been held captive by a single, vivid image. We see them as colossal figures, titans striding across primeval landscapes, their sheer scale dwarfing the early world. We picture them crushing cities underfoot, their physical dominance absolute, their presence a literal shadow cast over the infancy of humanity. It is a powerful, visceral scene that has defined our understanding for centuries. But what if this image is a total fabrication? What if our obsession with physical stature has blinded us to a much sharper, more unsettling truth? A growing number of researchers are now dismantling this Titan myth, arguing that the word giant was never meant to describe height or mass. When we strip away the layers of artistic interpretation, we find no evidence of a race of overgrown humans. Instead, we find a void where our certainty used to be. The intellectual unease is palpable, because once you let go of the giant, you are forced to confront something far more complex, and perhaps far more dangerous. To find the truth, we must stop looking at the horizon and start looking at the language itself. Delving into the ancient Hebrew, the term we have long translated as giant reveals a far more precise and far more chilling origin. It stems from a root tied inextricably to the concept of the fallen, not fallen in the sense of a physical descent from a height, but a fundamental collapse of being. This is the crucial pivot point where the myth of the Titan dissolves. If the word never meant massive stature, then we have been chasing a ghost of our own making. We are no longer talking about oversized humans walking the earth. We are talking about a state of existence, a spiritual or existential fall that separated these beings from the natural order. This is not a matter of biology, but of essence. It suggests a corruption that is not measured in inches or feet, but in the very fabric of identity. By shifting our focus from the physical to the existential, the narrative transforms. The mystery is no longer about how big they were, but about what they became. This realization forces us to confront a far more intricate reality. If their stature was not the defining trait, then what truly set them apart? This is the question that haunts every line of the ancient record. We are forced to look beyond the physical to the functional. What did these beings do that made them so distinct, so separate from the rest of humanity? The texts do not treat them as mere anomalies. They treat them as a fundamental rupture in the world. They are depicted with an ominous significance that suggests they were not just different, but dangerous. Think of the way they are framed in the oldest accounts. They are not simply present. They are catalysts. They move through the narrative as agents of a profound and unsettling change. Why were they recorded with such dread? Why does the mere mention of their name carry the weight of a warning? We are no longer looking at a race of giants, but at a specific, targeted influence that seemed to alter the trajectory of human history. Something about their presence, their knowledge, or their very nature demanded to be remembered and feared across every generation that followed. The answer to their dread lies in a phrase that has haunted scholars for centuries. All flesh was corrupted. This is not a local event or a minor skirmish. It is a totalizing, universal claim. When the ancient texts speak of this corruption, they do not isolate it to a single tribe or a specific region. They describe a systemic, pervasive failure that touched everything. For generations, historians have struggled to reconcile this phrasing. How could a single influence reach so far? How could it permeate the very essence of living things? This is the core of the mystery that refuses to be solved. It implies that the affliction was not an external attack but an internal transformation. It suggests a degradation that was not random but systematic. We are forced to ask what kind of power could alter the fundamental nature of all flesh. This is why the texts remain so deeply unsettling. They do not describe a war of swords or a clash of armies. They describe a shift in the biological order itself. What if this ancient, systemic corruption was not a metaphor, but a biological reality? Some researchers now suggest a radical lens. Could the phrase, "all flesh was corrupted," be an embryonic description of genetic manipulation? It is a jarring thought. We are accustomed to viewing these texts as myth, as stories born of superstition and fear. But what if they are actually a primitive record of something far more technical? Consider the possibility that the ancients were witnessing a process we are only now beginning to understand in our own laboratories. If an external influence could alter the very building blocks of life, the resulting chaos would be exactly what these texts describe. This is not just a shift in behavior or culture. It is a fundamental rewrite of the human code. The shock of this idea lies in its implications. We are forced to confront the chilling prospect that the foundation of our history may be rooted in a biological experiment that was never meant to be understood until now. The theory of a biological rewrite finds its most chilling support in the ancient accounts of the Watchers. According to the Venerable Book of Enoch, this was not a silent evolution, but a violent, celestial intrusion. The sky did not merely darken, it ignited. Radiant light tore through the firmament, marking the arrival of beings who descended from the heavens with a purpose that defied human understanding. Enoch, standing as a witness to this upheaval, recorded the moment the atmosphere itself seemed to shatter under the weight of their descent. This was the turning point. The Watchers were not mere observers of the human condition. They were active, powerful agents who bridged the gap between the celestial and the terrestrial. Their arrival was a high-stakes intervention that demanded the attention of all who lived beneath that burning sky. As the light intensified, the boundary between the known world and the unknown dissolved. The descent was only the beginning. Once the Watchers stood among humanity, they did not offer wisdom or spiritual guidance. They offered tools. They taught the art of metallurgy, showing men how to pull metal from the earth and forge it into instruments of power. They introduced the science of cosmetics, changing how humans presented themselves and perceived their own reflection. These were not mere crafts. They were disruptions. Before this moment, human progress moved at a glacial, natural pace. Now, it accelerated with a violent, artificial intensity. The forbidden knowledge acted as a catalyst, stripping away the boundaries of what was once considered impossible. It was a dangerous progress. Metallurgy brought the capacity for war, while the art of cosmetics shifted the focus toward vanity and social hierarchy. The human mind, once anchored in the rhythms of the natural world, was suddenly flooded with techniques that altered its very perception. This was the true corruption. Humanity began to see the world through a lens of manipulation, forever distancing itself from its original, simpler state. The influence of the Watchers did not stop at the surface. It penetrated deeper, reaching into the very code of human existence. What began as a transfer of forbidden arts soon evolved into a fundamental biological rewrite. The interaction between these celestial beings and humanity forged a new, hybrid reality. This was not a change in culture or belief. It was a transformation of the biological structure itself. Researchers now look at these ancient accounts and see the echoes of a systematic degradation. The human form, once defined by its natural lineage, became a vessel for something entirely different. This was the birth of a hybrid existence, a state of being that was no longer fully human in its fundamental nature. The boundaries that once separated the terrestrial from the celestial were erased, leaving behind a lineage that carried the mark of their origin in every cell. This was not a random mutation. It was a calculated, pervasive shift that altered consciousness, behavior, and physical reality. The evidence suggests that humanity was being reshaped from within. The transformation was not contained. It bled out from the individual into the collective, turning the world into a mirror of the corruption within. Ancient accounts describe this period with a chilling consistency, noting how the very air seemed to thicken with the weight of an impending end. The resonance of this change was felt across every continent. Where once there was a natural order, there was now a systematic unraveling. The hybrid existence acted as a catalyst, accelerating the degradation of human society until the foundations of civilization began to buckle under the strain. It was a slow, suffocating process. The records speak of a world that had lost its equilibrium, where the actions of the few dictated the fate of the many. As the corruption deepened, the natural world itself seemed to recoil. The skies darkened, the seasons grew erratic, and the silence of the wilderness was replaced by a sense of waiting. This was not merely a social decline. It was the precursor to a total collapse. The atmosphere became heavy with the certainty of a coming catastrophe, a global reckoning that would wash away the traces of this hybrid era. The world stood on the precipice, and the pressure of the impending flood began to build. The ancient texts do not speak of a localized plague or a simple decline in morality. They use a precise, haunting phrase: all flesh was corrupted. This is not a description of a temporary ailment. It is a technical record of a systematic, total degradation. Historians have long struggled with the implication of this phrasing, as it suggests a universal affliction that bypassed individual choice or geographic isolation. The corruption was not a random occurrence. It was a fundamental rewrite of the human blueprint. As this process took hold, the very fabric of human identity began to shift. Consciousness itself became a target. Observers note that the degradation targeted the core of human perception, altering how individuals understood their own existence. This was a biological and existential restructuring. The evidence suggests that the human form was repurposed, its natural functions diverted to serve a new, alien architecture. By the time this transformation reached its peak, the original human identity had been systematically dismantled. What remained was a consciousness bound to a corrupted vessel. This was the true nature of the pre-flood world. A global, coordinated degradation that left no aspect of human life untouched. The narrative of the Nephilim does not exist in a vacuum. Historians have long noted the striking parallels between these figures and the Apkallu of Mesopotamian mythology. These semi-divine beings were said to emerge from the sea, bringing the foundations of civilization to early humanity. Like the Watchers, the Apkallu were credited with imparting forbidden knowledge that fundamentally altered the trajectory of human development. When researchers compare these accounts, the similarities become impossible to ignore. Both traditions describe entities that operated outside the natural order, acting as catalysts for a rapid, forced evolution of human society. The geographical distance between these cultures suggests that this influence was not a localized phenomenon. Instead, it points toward a coordinated, global event that left its mark on diverse civilizations simultaneously. The consistency of these reports across different languages and eras implies a shared origin, a singular source of knowledge that permeated the ancient world, reveals a pattern of systematic intervention that transcended borders, suggesting that the transformation of the human experience was a global, orchestrated process. The towering figures etched into ancient stone have long been interpreted as literal giants, yet this perspective may be a profound misunderstanding of ancient visual language. When we observe these carvings, we see massive forms standing alongside human rulers, their scale dominating the composition. But what if this size is not a measure of anatomy, but a shorthand for authority? In the context of ancient iconography, size was frequently used to denote status, knowledge, and proximity to the divine. A figure rendered larger was not necessarily taller, they were more significant. This shift in perspective transforms our understanding of these scenes. Instead of a physical encounter between species of different heights, these carvings depict a hierarchy of power. The larger figures represent a superior tier of influence, a class of beings whose knowledge and control set them apart from the common population. This interpretation aligns with the idea that the Nephilim were defined by their existential status rather than their physical stature. By viewing these carvings through the lens of symbolic dominance, the mystery of their scale dissolves. We are left not with a record of biological anomalies, but with a deliberate visual proclamation of authority. If the Nephilim represented a fundamental alteration of the human experience, the Great Flood presents a jarring conclusion to their narrative. Ancient texts describe a world purged of corruption, yet the echoes of these beings refuse to fade. We must ask, did they truly vanish beneath the rising waters, or did they merely shift into the shadows of history? The persistence of similar legends across disparate cultures suggests that the deluge was not an absolute end. Instead, it may have been a catalyst for a different kind of survival. As the waters receded, the stories did not die, they mutated. They traveled through oral traditions, finding new vessels in the folklore of distant lands. This transition creates an unsettling realization. If these entities were not merely physical, then their destruction was not a matter of biology, but of containment. The mystery deepens as we realize that the end of their era was only the beginning of their transformation into something far more pervasive. The survival of the Nephilim beyond the Great Flood forces a shift in our investigation from the physical realm to the spiritual. Early Christian writers, tasked with reconciling these ancient accounts, proposed a chilling alternative to the idea of biological persistence. They suggested that the essence of these beings did not require a physical vessel to exert influence. Instead, they theorized that what we now categorize as demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, forever tethered to the world they once dominated. This interpretation introduces a profound level of unease into the historical record. It posits that the corruption mentioned in ancient texts was not merely a temporary affliction, but a permanent stain on the human experience. The debate surrounding this theory remains intense and deeply divisive. Critics argue that such claims are speculative, yet the theological weight of this connection is undeniable. It transforms the Nephilim from ancient historical anomalies into an active, ongoing concern. We are left to grapple with the unsettling realization that the most dangerous aspects of their history may not be found in the earth, but in the shadows of our own belief systems. The theological debate fades as we step into the shadow of the ancient valleys. Imagine the ground trembling under a rhythmic, heavy tread that defies the natural order. Figures move across the horizon, their presence alone warping the air. They do not run, they traverse the landscape with a terrifying, absolute certainty. Below them, the human population stops. Every movement ceases. People stand frozen, necks craned upward, eyes locked onto the towering silhouettes that blot out the sun. This is not a battle of armies, but a demonstration of total, crushing dominance. The air grows thin. The silence is heavy, pressing down on the chest like a physical weight. Every step taken by these entities sends a shockwave through the valley, forcing those below to their knees. It is a visceral, raw reality. The terror is not just in the sight of them, but in the sudden, sickening realization of helplessness. There is no escape from a presence that commands the very earth beneath your feet. The scale of their authority is absolute, turning the world into a stage for their movements. As they pass, the light shifts, the wind dies, and the people remain, trapped in the inescapable gravity of a power that views them as nothing more than dust in the path of a storm. The terror is not merely the presence of these beings, but the silent command that radiates from them. We look at the ancient accounts and see giants, but the text describes something far more insidious, a total suffocating authority over the human spirit. They do not need to strike to conquer. They simply exist, and in that existence they rewrite the boundaries of human will. The chains are not forged of metal. They are woven into the very thoughts of those who stand in their shadow. Every decision, every movement, every heartbeat becomes an extension of their intent. This is the true horror of their influence. It is a psychological occupation that leaves no room for dissent. The human mind, once free, finds itself tethered to a higher, colder logic. We see this in the way ancient records speak of a pervasive, inescapable corruption. It was not a physical plague, but a fundamental shift in the architecture of human perception. The spirit bends, the resolve fractures, and the individual fades into the background of a grand, orchestrated design. The psychological grip was only the beginning. Look at the landscape. Look at the stones. Across the globe, massive blocks of granite and basalt sit perfectly aligned, defying the tools and the time of the ancient world. We have long assumed these were the triumphs of human sweat and ingenuity. We were wrong. The records tell a different story, one of knowledge imparted from above. These sites were not raised by the hands of early man. They were orchestrated. The sheer scale of these structures, the precision of the cuts, the weight of the monoliths, none of it aligns with the primitive capabilities of the era. We stand before these ruins today and feel a lingering cold sense of displacement. We did not build these, we merely inherited them. The Watchers brought the blueprints, the methods, and the vision, while humanity provided the labor, acting as instruments in a design far beyond our comprehension. Every megalithic site is a testament to an intervention that fundamentally altered our trajectory. We are living in a world shaped by architects who were never human. If we discard the myth of brute force, the true nature of these monuments emerges. We imagine thousands of hands dragging stone, sweating under the sun, but the evidence suggests a far more elegant, terrifying reality. These structures were not built, they were sung into existence. The ancient records hint at a mastery of sound, a manipulation of vibration that could render the heaviest granite weightless. Imagine a frequency so precise it could liquefy the resistance of stone, allowing it to be shaped like soft clay. This was not technology as we know it, no gears, no levers, no pulleys. It was an acoustic architecture, a command over the fundamental resonances of matter itself. When the Watchers directed these forces, the very earth responded. The stones did not need to be hauled. They moved in harmony with a sound we have long forgotten how to hear. This revelation shatters our understanding of the ancient world. We look at the megaliths and see the limits of human muscle, but we should be seeing the mastery of natural laws. The true power was the ability to command the vibration of the world, turning the solid earth into a medium for an alien, resonant design. The echoes of that era did not vanish with the stones. They seeped into the bloodline. Modern science, in its relentless search for patterns, has stumbled upon a mystery that refuses to be ignored: rare blood types and genetic anomalies. These are not merely statistical outliers. They are whispers of a different origin, a biological residue left behind by the architects of the ancient world. We look at our own cells and see the standard map of humanity, yet some carry markers that suggest a divergence, a deviation that occurred long before recorded history. Researchers tread carefully here, often retreating behind the shield of academic caution, but the data remains. It points to a persistent variation, a genetic ghost. This is not a matter of myth or ancient carvings. It is a matter of DNA. The realization is cold and immediate. The hybridization of the past may not be a closed chapter. We are not just the descendants of early humanity. We are the vessels for a legacy that was never meant to be ours. Every anomaly in our blood is a silent testament. The ancient influence is not behind us. It is within us, waiting to be understood. A permanent, genetic reminder that we were never truly alone. The genetic echoes we observe today are not random mutations. They are the front lines of a conflict that predates recorded history. Genesis speaks of a seed war, a phrase often relegated to the margins of theology, yet it describes a fundamental schism in the human experience. This was not a war of territory or resources, but a clash between two distinct, competing forms of humanity. One lineage followed the natural arc of development, while the other bore the indelible mark of the Watchers. This is the hidden architecture of our history, a primal struggle for the very soul of the species. When ancient texts describe the corruption of all flesh, they are documenting the moment this divergence became absolute. It was a systematic infiltration, a biological and spiritual hijacking that forced a choice upon the world. We are not looking at a single, unified human story, but a fractured one. The Seed War represents the point where the human essence was split, creating a tension that has pulsed beneath the surface for millennia. It is a competition between the original blueprint and the hybrid modification. The battleground of the Seed War is not found in the ruins of ancient cities, but within the architecture of human perception. Ancient imagery of light and darkness clashing is not a record of a physical war, but a map of a psychological and spiritual divide. We see this dichotomy in every record. The stark, uncompromising lines between those who hold to the original human essence and those who have been fundamentally altered. This is a war for the soul. A silent, pervasive struggle where the weapons are not swords or fire, but influence, behavior, and the very way we interpret reality. The shadows described in these texts represent a systematic erosion of the natural human state, a darkening of the internal landscape that has persisted through the ages. It is a conflict of consciousness, where the light of original intent is constantly besieged by the encroaching influence of the hybrid modification. This is why the imagery remains so potent. It reflects a truth that we feel in our own lives, a tension between our innate potential and the forces that seek to redefine us. The struggle is not for land or power, but for the essence of what it means to be human. The light and the shadow are the two paths diverging within us. The struggle for our history is not confined to the pages of ancient texts. It manifests in the physical world, often where we least expect it. During the 19th century, a series of reports emerged from across the globe, documenting the discovery of skeletal remains that defied standard classification. These were not mere fragments. They were complete, anomalous structures unearthed in burial mounds and remote caves. Witnesses described proportions that challenged the established biological record, suggesting a form of humanity that did not align with conventional history. Yet, these accounts were short-lived. Almost as soon as they entered the public discourse, the evidence vanished. Excavation sites were sealed, private collections were seized, and official records were scrubbed of any mention of these findings. This was not a series of isolated accidents. It was a systematic, coordinated effort to erase the physical proof of a different human lineage. The disappearance of these remains is the final act of a long-standing suppression, ensuring that the mystery of the Nephilim remains safely tucked away. Why would such discoveries vanish? The question cuts through the silence left by the missing evidence. If these remains were merely anomalies, they would be studied, debated, and catalogued. Instead, they were treated as threats. Their removal from public view suggests a motive far more calculated than simple scientific error. It points to a deliberate policy of silence, a mechanism designed to protect a specific version of our past. When physical proof of a different human lineage is systematically scrubbed, the objective is not to preserve knowledge, but to prune it. We are forced to consider that the history we accept is not a neutral record, but a curated narrative. By suppressing these findings, the architects of this erasure ensure that the narrative of a singular, linear human evolution remains unchallenged. This is not just a loss of data. It is a fundamental distortion of our identity. If the evidence of our true origins is being actively hidden, then every foundation of our historical understanding becomes suspect. The disappearance of these discoveries is a calculated act of concealment. The realization that physical evidence has been purged is only the beginning of a deeper, more pervasive problem. History itself is not a static record. It is a fluid, malleable construct that has been rewritten, translated, and reinterpreted across countless generations. We often assume that ancient texts provide a direct window into the past, but we ignore how frequently these accounts were filtered through the specific biases and agendas of the cultures that preserved them. Every time a manuscript was copied or a language was translated, the original intent was subjected to a subtle yet constant process of alteration. These shifts were rarely accidental. They were deliberate adjustments designed to align ancient events with the prevailing theological or political frameworks of the time. Consequently, Our modern understanding of the past is built upon a foundation of subsequent interpretations rather than the raw, original events. The story of the Nephilim serves as a perfect case study for this phenomenon. Over millennia, the narrative has been stripped of its nuance, reshaped to fit the expectations of those who held the pen. We are not reading history. We are reading the result of a long, systematic curation. The narrative we accept today is not the story as it happened, but the story as it was permitted to survive, leaving us to reconstruct a reality that has been intentionally obscured by the passage of time. The image of towering giants striding across the landscape is perhaps the most enduring yet most misleading element of this entire mystery. It is a simple, digestible version of a far more intricate story, designed to capture the imagination while obscuring the truth. By focusing on physical scale, we are drawn into a visual trap that prevents us from seeing the deeper, more unsettling implications buried within the ancient texts. This archetype of the giant provides a convenient, singular focal point, but it fails to account for the profound, systemic transformation that the original records actually describe. When we reduce these beings to mere monsters of size, we effectively sanitize the narrative, stripping away the complex questions of genetic or existential alteration. This simplification is not accidental. It serves to neutralize a reality that is far more challenging to comprehend. The giant myth acts as a barrier, a comfortable boundary. We are left with a caricature that satisfies our need for spectacle while masking the evidence of a deeper, more pervasive shift in our own nature. The giant is a distraction, a narrative placeholder that shields us from the realization that the true story is not about how big they were, but about how much they changed us. If the narrative of the giant is merely a veil, we are forced to confront a far more unsettling possibility. What if the Nephilim were not defined by their immense size, but by a profound, systemic transformation that fundamentally altered the very essence of what it means to be human? This shift suggests that the ancient interaction was not merely an external event, but an internal, biological, or existential realignment. We must ask ourselves, if the core of humanity was rewritten, how would we even recognize the remnants of that change today? Perhaps the true identity of these beings was something far more subtle, yet infinitely more significant than any physical description could convey. This possibility forces us to look inward, questioning the foundations of our own consciousness, behavior, and biological structure. We are left to wonder if the legacy of that ancient era is not found in stone or myth, but in the very fabric of our own existence. The question is no longer about who they were, but about what we have become. What if the transformation was not a singular event, but a continuous, unfolding reality? This tantalizing possibility continues to captivate both readers and researchers alike. We find ourselves drawn to these ancient accounts, not because they offer a clear, definitive map of our origins, but because they challenge the very limits of our understanding. Hidden within these fragmented writings lie questions that humanity is still striving to answer today. The mystery of the Nephilim remains so powerfully compelling precisely because it refuses to be contained by simple explanations. It is not a puzzle with a single, elegant solution waiting to be discovered. Instead, it is a vast, shifting landscape of inquiry. The deeper we delve into the records, the more complex and enigmatic the story becomes. Every layer we peel back reveals another, more intricate set of contradictions. We are left to navigate a space where history, biology, and the unknown intersect in ways that defy traditional logic. This is not a failure of our investigation, but a reflection of the profound nature of the subject itself. We are not meant to find a final, static truth, but to remain in a state of constant, active questioning. The story ends not with a period, but with a lingering, haunting curiosity.